Adobe microphone. Without that, it's really hard to make.
Let's continue the
Yes, it says. Get out of their way.
Excuse me, we're going to get started in about 3 minutes.
How many minutes? 3. Yeah, 3. Okay. Waiting for Rebecca.
That work?
Can I give a quick housekeeping note? Can I give a quick housekeeping note?
Hi, everybody. We're going to get started in 1 minute. 1 minute. So if everybody could take their seats. If everybody could take their seats, we're going to get started in 1 minute. Thanks so much. Hi, everybody. If you could all take your seats, we're about to get started. And please feel free to move up. There are some empty seats up front, so please feel free, especially if the column is blocking your view. There are seats up in the front. Thanks.
Fabulous job this morning. Good. Hi, everybody. Okay. I hope everybody is nourished by some good food, some good company, and also some new ideas and some old new ideas. Being old is new, I'm still Anne Mosle, so anybody who's new, welcome again to the Aspen Institute. And this is where we're really going to begin to shift gears a little bit and say, let's look forward the next 50 years. And so when we think about looking forward the next 50 years, big vision, but time moves so fast. So 50 years, what's it going to look like? What's the world going to look like? We've all read about the major shifts, be it globalization, be it demographics, be it economic. But then let's make it a little bit more real and say, what's going to happen in the next 5 years? Next 3 years, 2 years, 1 year. And even tomorrow for when we think about that here. But I do want to really, we were very intentional in how we started the day. We wanted to talk about really our history. And so I really want to thank Dr. Blanca Enriquez for your wonderful discussion this morning. And I think it's really fantastic to note that many, if not all of the Head Start directors or some of the administration early childhood leaders started in the classroom. So this kind of belief we have, and we share with many others about sort of connecting practice and policy, it's really wonderful to see the elevation. I always want to thank one of my most beloved colleagues, Anne Mosle, who brings the best of the Aspen Institute with the values perspective, the heart, the soul, and a fantastic panel. Shannon, Yvette, and Tamika. Really, this has been a conversation many of us have been having in smaller groups, but pulling it out. Because as we all know, there's strategy, there's policies, there's politics. But if it is not grounded in values and vision, it is not going to go anywhere very far or be very meaningful. No one went to battle over a PowerPoint. So I just think it's really important that we arm ourselves in the world of Washington or, great planning, great strategy is to disconnect ourselves from our vision and our values is to really kind of miss the big story. So 2 quick things I just want to remind us about. I'm going to talk a little bit about Y2Gen and what it offers us in going forward. And then we have a very special guest who is going to come up and speak in a moment. But quickly, before I do that, I want to say a few things about we've talked about the issue of silos. We've talked about the issues of fragmentation. That happens in policy. It happens in programming. It happens with the best of intentions. And so one of the things that we try to do here at Ascend at the Aspen Institute is push ourselves always to step back to these pressures that put us in those silos. And with the 2-generation approach, at its most basic level, it says, how do we connect the services, strategies, and strengths of children and the parents and the adults in their lives, and how do we bring that together? And it doesn't mean, as many people pointed earlier, that everybody does everything, but how do we partner and integrate more carefully? One of the things, as someone who is a complete, passionate, unabashed supporter and person who's grateful to the early childhood field, but one small critique I have is a lot of times we try to organize our conversations around, is it about 0 to 3? Is it 0 to 5? Is it to 0 to 8? Okay. For families, that's not how they organize and think about their lives. And I understand all of the reasons, but I want to kind of humbly keep us. We talked a lot and really powerfully, authentically, how we are really committed to meeting families where they are. Let's, kind of keep that push, that gentle push on ourselves. I also want to share one thing. For us, a two-generation approach, children and parents together, it's about all the things that we want for all of our families. Education, from early, K-12, post-secondary on up. It's about economic assets and supports. That's everything from housing, childcare, transportation. It's about health and well-being. We've learned a lot, and we've talked, all of the early vision 50 years ago, we've learned a lot through the adverse childhood experiences. We've learned a lot more from toxic stress. We're learning a lot more about brain science. But how we're thinking, and the issues around mental health, which is the one, if I were to say in my adult learning the past 3 years, I have humbly learned how much more I have to learn around how we think differently about mental health in this broader picture. And then where's Shannon Russell? Is she still here? She's behind the pole. We have this dreadful pole, Roberto. But Shannon, everybody hides. This issue around social capital, which I actually think is one of the most important resources and strategies we have, but many times it's thought of as being soft. And it's about the trust, the relationships we have in our lives, and many times they're embedded in programs, but how do we lift them up and sort of help them go forward. So Shannon, you and I might be co-creating a little task force to go more deep on that. But the only thing is when we talk about those core components, there's one thing I want to remind us, and Elliot Gerson sort of underscored this from the Aspen Institute, was that we really need to marshal our resources and efforts together to address the issues around advancing opportunity and equality. And if you go under the underbelly of that, usually we're solution oriented, but you think about poverty and inequality. Those are two different things, but are very connected. And so when we think about that, Sean Reardon from Stanford has done some great research that actually was the underpinning of a lot of Bob Putnam's recent book that came out, but showed that we're seeing one of the big factors for the achievement gap growing is that parents and families in the top 20 and 40%, they know early childhood works. They know coordinated supports work. They know these components are vital, and they are quadrupling their investment. It's not that the folks at the lower 20% or 40% don't know that. They don't have the resources. And we got to structure this differently. And so I think for me, that's a really salient point. So I'd like to just share a few things and remind you, many of you contributed to the development of these and the policy agenda around two generations that has been kind of bubbling up from partners and practitioners and policymakers over the past 2 years. But the top 10 for 2Gen. And the top 10 policy recommendations were a starting place. They were not the end all and be all, but we wanted a list and we wanted to get to work. What we thought was more important that came out of that were the 6 principles. And so again, as we've talked about values this morning, principles help us guide and organize our work to make meaning. And so the 6 principles, and I'm going to just kind of remind us of them, and they very much relate to the values that were discussed at the earlier session, is first, we really need to account for and measure outcomes for children and parents together. As we know, the old saying, you value what you measure. It's qualitative, it's quantifiable. My dear friend Reggie Bika from the great state of Colorado, he's sort of taken that to work where he's worked at the Colorado Department of Human Services, where he's looked at, okay, I might be rethinking child support, or I might be rethinking TANF, a very adult-centric kind of strategy. But how do I build a child outcome in that so I can strengthen the overall strategy? Engage with and listen to the voices and experiences of families from a strength-based approach. We all know this, I won't say more, but that really working with and not for families, ensure equity, that's just a cross-cutting, absolutely critical issue. The 3 ones I want to hit a little bit because we didn't talk about this morning was really about fostering innovation and evidence together. And especially, Roberto, I look for your thoughts and potential partnership on this. My dear friend and Yvette Sanchez-Fuentes and I stay up at night. We haven't started emailing at 2 in the morning yet. But one of the ideas, she's going to send me answers, I'll send her questions. She's like, oh God, I'm scared. We do have family rules here a little bit, Roberto, audience engagement. But there's a very important orientation around evidence-based practice and evidence-informed practice. For those of us, many on the front line, there's promising practices, there's innovation. And how are we really building the capacity to link those up so they're feeding into the evidence conversation? Not every strategy requires a randomized controlled trial. Not every effort can get $2.5 million unless Shelley makes that happen with the Annie Casey Foundation. Totally kidding. I'm totally kidding. But we need, I want to really have us talk about that because I think that's a huge strength area for us. The other one is how we align align our systems and our funding. And this is something I'm sure the Domestic Policy Council, the White House, the various agencies, Mark Greenberg, who's a beloved friend to many of us on these issues, will sometimes say he thinks about the Administration for Children and Families at the Department of Health and Human Services as the original two-gen agency. And so how are those even coming together? But across the boundaries. And Carla Thompson, who's a dear friend for many from the Kellogg Foundation, she and I were recently talking at an Asset Funders Network meeting, and she said, we as funders, we have to recognize that if we fund in silos, we shouldn't be surprised if people behave in silos. So I just kind of want to underscore that, and we understand why. But let's go beyond. And then the last one, the sixth one, is to prioritize intentional implementation. And this doesn't mean when you talk about comprehensive services, you're talking about everything, but you're talking about intentional integration. So just like we have this new El Paso bubbling up place-based effort with Yvette and Blanca, who will be co-heading it, we have a new Ascend Fellow with President William Serrata of the El Paso Community College. So how do we start a conversation that is 2 generations at a time moving forward, but let's be in it from the beginning? So the momentum around the 2-generation approach, we are blessed to be working with about 100 of the best and brightest fellows, organizations, and many, many others across the country. And we're seeing great work happen across policy, practice, and in places where families live. I'm not going to speak to the federal work because we'll have Roberto Rodriguez in just a moment really talking about what this fantastic administration has done in many ways. But I will say that we are seeing incredible momentum and action at the state level. And the state work that we're seeing crosses from Washington, Colorado, Utah, Tennessee, Massachusetts, where it's both looking at intergenerational legislation, new models of human services, new partnerships across education and economic assets, for example. And that is something, if you note those states, they are very different. They are R&D, they have different economies, they're on different places. And so I can talk later about that down the road. But we're also seeing new practices, new fields, new organizations. One of our network partners that I really wanted to highlight was the National Council of La Raza. We have been working very closely with them over the past 2 years. For the first time, using the 2-gen approach, their early childhood and their workforce teams are coming together to work. We're going to be doing workshops with them this summer to go out to their networks. And then how can other networks learn and grow from them? In places, we're seeing places, different states, El Paso, Denver, Washington, D.C., where organizations are saying we need to come together differently. So with all that being said, there is momentum, there is interest, there are new diverse leaders that really represent the best. So what are the strategic issues ahead? We need to build the political and public will. We need to focus on what works and let go what doesn't work. And this is one where I want to really do a shout out to the administration, where I think in the Head Start specifically with the redesignation and the recompetition, that was not an easy decision to make. That was not easy, but it was the right question for the right reason at the right time. And so I think looking at different ways to raise the right questions so we're moving the ball forward. We also need to innovate and collaborate in new ways. And this is something, again, I think this administration has been phenomenal when we think about the choice investments, the promise investments, the race to the top, early childhood challenge grants, the early childhood child care partnerships. We sort of tried to map a lot of those to see where they were across the country, to see how we can maybe help connect some of those. It's just a wonderful opportunity. So when we put those pieces out there, without question, this administration, the Obama administration, has been committed to making children and families a priority, to really using the bully pulpit to raise that up. The administration, in many different ways, has been committed to saying, let's try to focus resources about where they're working, and let's try to be respectful, strategic, and wise about how do we phase out things that might not be working. And then on the issue of innovation and collaboration, I think this administration has been phenomenal in trying to always bring in voices of families, of communities, of partner organizations. So with that said, I don't think we were very fortunate to have Roberto Rodriguez come join us as a lunch speaker. We will not let you go back. Yes, we will. But as many of you know, Roberto, he is a Deputy Assistant to the President for Education and the White House Domestic Policy Council. Roberto serves as a Deputy Assistant to the President for Education in the White House. In this capacity, he serves on President Obama's domestic policy team, managing the President's education agenda and leading program and policy development and strategy for early learning and early childhood education, K-12, and post-secondary education. Prior to his time in the White House, Roberto worked in the United States Senate as Chief Education Counsel to the late Senator Edward Kennedy, Chairman of the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee. We know the depth of that work for sure. Roberto has also worked with NCLR, which is a little slow, apparently, and is a native of Grand Rapids, Michigan, which I did not know, and go for the mitten, and is a graduate of the University of Michigan and the Harvard Graduate School of Education. He's a dear friend to all of us. He's passionate about children and families, and we are very grateful to have you here with us today. Thank you, Roberto. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm really thrilled to be here this afternoon. Thanks so much. A big thank you to Anne for the invitation to join you and for her leadership and to the